Welcome to Psyche Talks. For this deep dive, we're focusing entirely on the sources you've shared with us. We're going to tackle that often invisible, sometimes really maddening inner battle creative people face, and maybe more importantly, how the work of Steven Pressfield, as laid out in this material, offers a path to actually winning it. Our goal today is pretty simple. Jump right into these sources, pull out the most potent insights, the key takeaways, and really help you get a handle on this powerful framework quickly and clearly. Just the essential nuggets.
Yeah, and what's so compelling, I think, about this material is how it names these forces we all feel, but, maybe don't have a word for or don't fully understand. It presents this concept the author calls resistance, this universal internal adversary. And then it offers not just a way to fight it, but a whole shift in being, which he calls turning pro. Plus, it explores these really intriguing ideas about where true creative power might come from, what the sources call the higher realm. It gets right to the heart of why it feels so hard sometimes, doesn't it? To do the work that matters most to us.
Okay, so let's unpack that first piece then. Resistance. The sources kick off by giving this enemy a name. And it's presented not just as, laziness or putting things off.
No, it's deeper.
Yeah, it's this pervasive inner force that rises up whenever we even consider a significant, long-term action that's genuinely good for us. Or for others. It's positioned as something really ingrained, even linked, surprisingly, to Freud's idea of the death wish, this kind of innate drive towards self-sabotage.
That link to the death wish is intense, isn't it? But it really underscores how seriously this force is presented. And it shows up in so many ways that are probably, painfully familiar to most of us. Procrastination, like you said, that's the classic one, right?
Yeah.
I'll start that big project tomorrow.
And tomorrow somehow never comes for that task.
Exactly. But the sources point out even more subtle, maybe more insidious forms.
Like what? What are some of the less obvious ways this resistance shows up?
Well, seeking support, believe it or not, is highlighted as a potentially major form.
Seeking support. That sounds good, though.
It does, and support can be good. But the sources describe a version of seeking support that becomes a pretext for not doing the work yourself, Like needing constant validation, asking endless questions instead of just diving in and trying something.
Yeah.
Or surrounding yourself with a support system that actually, maybe unintentionally, enables your inaction. It's seductive because you feel like you're doing something related to the work.
But you're not actually doing the work. You're talking about it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That resonates.
Yeah.
What else? The sources mention something about getting into trouble.
Yes, absolutely. And this can be a whole range of things. It could be persistent ill health, maybe psychosomatic stuff that always flares up right when you need to focus, or more dramatic things, addiction, self-traumatization, constantly creating crises in your life that demand all your energy.
Pulling you away from the real work.
Exactly. Anything that provides a, quote, plausible pretext for why you just can't show up for what truly matters to your soul.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, thinking about the nature of this resistance. The sources describe its characteristics. It's insidious. It'll lie, manipulate, tell you anything to keep you from sitting down and doing the work. And it's propian, meaning it changes shape.
Yeah, constantly shifting. Just when you think you've identified it as procrastination, maybe it morphs into perfectionism or suddenly needing to do more research.
Right. And it's implacable. Relentless, like an engine programmed just to stop you.
An engine of destruction aimed specifically at preventing your creative expression, your growth.
But then there's that flip side, that counterintuitive point the sources make. Resistance is also infallible.
This is key.
How so?
It's like a compass, but in reverse. Because it only opposes actions that move us from a lower state to a higher one, from inaction to creation, fear to courage, the mundane towards our calling. The very presence of intense resistance, that feeling of, oh God, I really don't want to do this, tells you precisely what you must do.
So that overwhelming fear about starting something.
The sources would say that's a huge flashing sign. That's the work your soul is calling you towards. That's where the growth is.
It completely turns fear on its head. Instead of a stop sign, it's a green light, almost.
Almost, yeah. Or at least an indicator you're facing the right direction. And the sources really hammer home these other traits, too. It's internal. The enemy is within. It's self-generated, self-perpetuated.
Not something outside of us.
Right. But paradoxically, it's impersonal. It doesn't care who you are, rich, poor, famous, unknown. If you're trying to create, trying to grow, resistance will show up.
And its power comes from
Fear, our fear of it. That's its fuel. The more afraid we are, the stronger it seems.
Wow.
And it never sleeps. It plays for keeps. It doesn't just want to slow you down. The sources are clear. It wants to kill your spirit, that unique creative impulse you carry.
So just take a moment listening to this. Think about that. When you feel stuck, when you find yourself endlessly scrolling instead of starting that thing, when you suddenly feel too tired or not inspired enough, or you get this sudden urgent need to reorganize your entire closet right when you were about to tackle that important project, is that just you being lazy? Or is it maybe this force, the source is called resistance, showing up? The sources even talk about this idea of an unlived life within each of us, full of potential, full of expression. And resistance is presented as this formidable barrier separating the life we're living now from that potential one.
And if resistance is the powerful adversary, the material then offers a really potent strategy for fighting back. That's the second big part, turning pro.
Turning pro.
Yeah, and this concept is crucial. It's not necessarily about making your living from your creative work, though it certainly helps enable that. It's fundamentally about adopting a professional attitude, a complete shift in mindset towards your craft or your calling, whether that's writing, painting, starting a business, any endeavor that calls to your soul.
And the sources draw a really sharp contrast between the amateur and the professional mindset here.
They do.
The amateur plays for fun, maybe part-time. They often over-identify with their art. Their ego is all wrapped up in it.
Right. So they're terrified of failure, terrified of judgment. That fear paralyzes them.
Whereas the professional
plays for keeps.
Yeah.
It's a vocation, a full-time commitment in terms of energy and discipline. Even if they have a day job, they are disciplined. They focus intensely on the work itself, on the process.
Detached from the outcome.
Exactly. Detached from the outcome. They do the work for the work's sake, letting the rewards or the lack of rewards just fall where they may. It reminds me of that great line from Somerset Maugham the sources mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
When asked if he only wrote when inspiration struck, he apparently said something like, "Fortunately, inspiration strikes me every morning at 9 o'clock sharp."
That is the professional attitude right there. Showing up regardless.
That's it. You show up.
So what are the key qualities, then, of this professional mindset that the sources outline?
Yeah.
How do you become that person?
Well, there's a whole list, and they're all kind of interconnected, really. But first and foremost, show up every day.
The bedrock.
Absolute bedrock. You make the commitment, you carve out the time, and you are there, putting in the hours, whether you feel like it or not. No negotiation.
Okay. Non-negotiable. What else?
Focus on the work. The professional isn't constantly getting sidetracked by looking for external validation or checking social media or comparing themselves to others. All that energy goes into the task at hand. The work is the point.
And not just doing the work, but doing it well, right?
Right.
There's a craft aspect.
Exactly. Master technique. Professionals respect their craft. They dedicate themselves to learning the skills, improving, getting better at actually executing their vision. It's not just about having great ideas. It's about developing the competence to bring them to life effectively.
Okay, this next one feels huge, especially thinking back to resistance being fueled by fear. Act in the face of fear.
Crucial. The sources are really clear. Fear doesn't just vanish because you decide to turn pro. They mention Henry Fonda.
The axer.
Yeah, apparently at 75 years old, still performing on stage, he would still throw up from nerves before every show.
Wow. After all that time.
Right. So the difference isn't the absence of fear. The professional feels the fear, acknowledges it maybe, but acts in spite of it. You don't wait for fear to go away. You do the work. And the fear loses its power because you acted.
Action starves fear.
You could say that, yeah.
Huh?
And tied right into that is, accept my face. No excuses. Resistance is a master excuse generator offering really plausible reasons why today just isn't the day.
I'm too tired. I need to clean the garage first. The stars aren't aligned.
Exactly. The professional learns to recognize these for what they are, resistance in disguise, and just doesn't accept them. They understand resistance is cunning and will use anything.
This next one seems incredibly hard, but vital. Don't take failure or success personally.
Oof, yeah. This is tough, but so important. The sources stress that the work is separate from your ego. So the professional doesn't let a bad review or a failed project define their self-worth. And just as importantly, they don't let massive success inflate their ego so much that they stop working or think they've got it all figured out.
There's that example in the sources about Tiger Woods, right?
Yeah, recomposing himself instantly after a camera clicks right in the middle of his backswing during the Masters. That level of mental detachment.
Just focus on the shot.
Purely on the execution of the task. Despite the external chaos or potential consequences, his identity in that moment wasn't tied to the click or the outcome, but solely to the process, to the swing itself. That's professional focus.
That's tough-mindedness.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it leads directly to the next quality, self-validate. The pro doesn't rely on external praise or criticism to know if their work has value or if they're on the right track. They develop an objective eye. They assess their own work, learn from feedback, yes, but ultimately trust their own judgment and keep going, whether the world cheers or ignores them.
And finally, things will go wrong.
Inevitably. So endure adversity, rejection, humiliation, projects falling apart spectacularly. It happens. The sources mention that story about the movie King Kong Lives being a huge flop.
Right.
But the author reframed it. It wasn't a personal failure. It was the price of admission, the cost of being in the arena, taking risks, rather than sitting safely on the sidelines.
You accept it as part of the game.
Professionals accept it as part of the journey, and crucially, don't let it stop them, which leads to what the sources actually call the cardinal virtue for an artist.
Which is?
Contempt for failure. Not fear of failure, but a disdain for being stopped by it, a refusal to be defeated by setbacks.
Wow. Contempt for failure. That's strong. So thinking about your own goals listening to this, your own aspirations, maybe creative, maybe something else entirely. What would it truly look like for you to adopt this professional attitude? Which of these qualities feels like the biggest hurdle, and which one, if you focused on it, might make the biggest difference right now? Maybe what specific small habit could you change today, like right now, to simply show up for that thing you keep putting off, even if it's just for 15 minutes? Because that simple act of showing up, that's the first powerful step in turning pro.
And then, moving beyond just the battle against resistance, the third part of the sources shifts focus. It introduces the idea that we aren't actually alone in this struggle. There are forces called the muses, angels, the deeper self. The sources use various terms that actually support our creative efforts when we sort of align ourselves correctly.
Right. This brings in a more mystical element, or at least an ancient perspective. The sources talk about the classical idea of the muse.
Yeah, like in Homer's Odyssey, the poet doesn't start by saying, I'm going to tell you a story. He says, sing in me, muse.
Invoking something outside himself.
Exactly. It's this idea that inspiration isn't solely generated by our conscious mind, our ego. It comes through us from a higher, maybe unseen source. The artist's role becomes one of humility, of service. You prepare yourself, you do the work, you show up, and you become a channel for something greater than your individual self.
It's a shift from I create to it creates through me.
Precisely. And the sources also bring in some Jungian psychology here, drawing a contrast between the ego and the self.
Okay, how do they define those?
The ego is described pretty much as our everyday consciousness, focused on the material world, survival, seeing ourselves as separate, driven by fear. It's the part of us that believes death is final, time is linear and absolute, and we're fundamentally isolated individuals.
That sounds like, well, normal waking consciousness for many people.
Pretty much, yeah. But the self, in this context from the sources, is presented differently. It's a deeper, more connected aspect of our psyche, linked perhaps to the divine or universal consciousness. It believes in oneness, in evolution, in love. It sees death and time as maybe illusory from a higher perspective.
And where does creativity fit into that?
The sources suggest that dreams, intuition, those sudden flashes of insight, they often come from this deeper self. They're guiding us towards our true path, our unique creative expression. They mention a couple of dream examples, like one about a character named Largo, who realizes the power he was seeking outside himself was actually within him all along. Or another, the eagle dream, which powerfully suggested that intangible things, intuitive truths, can be just as real and substantial as physical objects. These are seen as messages from the self guiding us.
Okay, I see how that connects. And this ties into another really key concept in the sources that helps explain why we do the work, or maybe how we should approach it. Hierarchy versus territory.
Oh, this is fundamental, absolutely fundamental to understanding where creative people, or anyone pursuing a calling, finds their sustenance, their motivation.
So hierarchy first. What's that?
Hierarchy means defining your worth and your success based on external metrics. Think rank, status, validation from others, constantly comparing yourself. Where am I on the ladder compared to them? It's driven entirely by the ego's need for external approval, for status. The sources suggest a hack operates from hierarchy, always asking what will sell, what do people want, rather than
what needs to be expressed through me.
Exactly. And territory, that's the opposite. Territory is finding your sustenance, your meaning, your energy, purely in the act of doing the work itself.
For its own sake.
For its own sake, for the internal satisfaction, the growth it brings, the connection to that deeper self maybe, regardless of whether it brings fame, fortune, or any external validation at all, you're operating from a place aligned with the self, not the ego's need for applause.
The sources give Arnold Schwarzenegger as an example.
Yeah, his intense dedication to the gym, early on especially. The argument is he didn't just lift weights to win Mr. Olympia titles, though he did. He lifted because the physical act, the discipline, the feeling of the pump, the sheer work that sustained him, the gym was his territory.
That makes sense. And Van Gogh, too, right?
Yeah.
The ultimate territorial artist, maybe?
Absolutely. Sold almost nothing in his lifetime. Faced unbelievable hardship, zero external validation by hierarchical standards, yet kept creating these masterpieces. Why?
Because the work itself sustained him.
His drive came from inside, from the territory of painting itself. So when we really grasp resistance as this force driven largely by the ego's fear and insecurity, and when we adopt that professional attitude, showing up consistently, focusing on the work, mastering the craft, we are, in a very real sense, shifting our orientation. We're moving away from the anxieties of hierarchy and grounding ourselves in the power of territory.
We align ourselves with the self.
And perhaps open ourselves up to those higher forces the sources talk about, the muses, the angels, the energies that seem to want to bring creative expression into the world through us.
So the creative act, seen this way, isn't just personal therapy or trying to get famous.
No, it becomes almost a responsibility. A gift offered to the world, brought into being by the individual who's learned to manage their ego's resistance and dedicate themselves to their territory.
It really flips the script, doesn't it? Making the artist more of a conduit, a dedicated servant, rather than the sole genius source. So maybe ask yourself, listening now, when you approach that big project, that important goal in your life, are you operating mostly from hierarchy? Are you driven by fear of judgment or the desperate need for external success and validation? Or are you finding your energy, your purpose, your sustenance simply in the doing of the work itself? From territory, for its own intrinsic value.
What is that unlived life within you? What's that creative impulse nudging you, urging you to bring something into existence?
And maybe most practically, what small step could you take today, right now, to claim your territory, to move even slightly away from the external noise of hierarchy and closer to the internal satisfaction of just doing the work? So we've journeyed through quite a bit here, identifying that inner enemy, resistance, exploring the professional attitude needed to confront it head on,
Turning pro.
and looking at these perhaps unseen forces, these allies, that the sources suggest support us on our creative path.
So if resistance is this formidable inner force, constantly pulling us down, trying to prevent us from expressing our unique gifts, from reaching our potential, maybe consider this final thought. Perhaps the power to connect with your deepest self, the power to bring that unlived life into being. Maybe it isn't something you need to earn or find somewhere out there. Could it be more like a hidden energy source, always available right here, right now, simply waiting for you to make the fundamental decision? The decision to step into the arena, commit to the work, show up, and quite simply, turn pro.
Thank you for your support and for listening.